Now, this discussion is inspired by 3 books. Number 1 is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Number 2 is The 7-Day Mental Diet by Emmett Fox. And number 3, The Heavenly Life by James Allen. The purpose of this video is to build upon the video of last Thursday, as well as to contribute further to the video that I released on Sunday. Last Thursday, we spoke about flow and the importance of seeing your deep work or creative expression sessions from the perspective of flow, integrating flow. Now, in the book Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill discusses a very important concept that can be very helpful to us. And it's the idea of drifting. So he asked the question, describe all the ways in which you induce people to drift. Define the word and tell us exactly what you mean by it. In which the response was given, I can best define the word drift by saying that people who think for themselves never drift, while those who do little or no thinking for themselves are drifters. A drifter is one who permits himself to be influenced and controlled by circumstances outside of his own mind. So there holds the key. We have the ability to interpret our journey from the perspective of our vision, or we have the ability to allow certain interpretations of suggestion to bring us into different states of mind. Now, what we want to do is maintain a certain presence of mind by further developing fluidity of mind, which is something that I speak of regularly as we were going through the discussions of the book, The Kabbalion, in which they articulated also in the concept of polarity, understanding that there are many different perspectives on a scale and many different nuanced perspectives on that scale. And what we're looking for is the accurate perspective to interpret the 5 sensory data and harmonize the divergent and convergent viewpoints in relation to the vision. This is also what James Allen refers to in the book The Heavenly Life as the divine center. So that's what we're going to discuss, getting into and maintaining this divine center. He says, the secret of life, of abundant life, with its strength, its felicity, and its unbroken peace, is to find the divine center within oneself and to live in and from that, instead of that outer circumference of disturbances. Otherwise, we might find ourselves drifting through the following ways, which I've seen on the journey of realizing my goals within myself, as well as working with other entrepreneurs. Number 1, lack of consistency. Number 2, having many ideas, but however, not picking a few ideas and seeing them all the way to completion. Commitment. Number 3, not valuing the optimization of the ideas. For example, a person may decide to start a business in, for example, a Shopify store. So they coordinate the setting up of the product and the website and the drop shipping and whatever else related to it. And they start an ad campaign. They run ads to it, but it didn't produce the kind of results that they wanted. When a person does not recognize the value of optimization, they may conclude that it didn't work. What we want to identify with is accurate thinking, the ability to understand that there are different conversion points leading up all the way to the sale and even beyond the sale. For example, the amount of people that saw the ad, the amount of people that clicked on the ad, then the sequence in which they followed, in which they exited the page or bought the product or service. And through analyzing and studying these different aspects and finding flow and joy in doing this, a person discovers new ideas, accurate and true information that's going to be in contribution to the vision, bringing forth the success. Certain kinds of thinking that seems to bring forth a limited perspective on what we are working on is something that we want to exclude out of consciousness and, if needed, understand it so that we can resolve these aspects or differences within, such as what we discussed in the last few videos. Person has not, number 4, cultivated the ability to transcend their fears, doubts, indecisions, and insecurities during the process. And perhaps they overly identify with the opinions of others on how they should do things. And we've been discussing one of the goals is to develop a greater degree of understanding that we can find the answers within ourselves. Certainly, we can find the answers as well in the sea of ideas we call the internet, where there are many different perspectives, many different techniques, many different methods of bringing forth a vision, many different ways to optimize your business. However, what we want is clarity within ourselves, as James Allen says, maintaining a divine center, so we can find the accurate optimization element and integrate it so we can maintain a higher degree of flow and move forward in a sequential way to produce the results, thus further also building this relationship with ourselves and self-trust. Now, Napoleon Hill in Outwitting the Devil, he says, your other self will remain in charge and continue to direct you as long as you rely upon it. Keep doubt and fear and worry and all thoughts of limitation entirely out of your mind. So remember what he said, a drifter is one who permits himself to be influenced and controlled by circumstances outside of his own mind. Now, Emmett Fox in his book, The 7-Day Mental Diet, says it really well when he says, negative thoughts may come to you during the day. Some of them just might drift into your own mind of their own accord, seemingly. Other negative thoughts may be stimulated by conversation, or you may hear disagreeable opinion-based news. As stated in the Hermetica, we were given 2 gifts, speech and mind. And when we recognize that we're given 2 gifts of speech and mind, we also realize that we are transcendent to them, as in we have the 2 gifts of speech and mind. So if we have the 2 gifts of speech and mind, then it's important to use consciously the 2 gifts of speech and mind on the journey to bringing forth our vision, staying committed, evolving beyond lack of consistency, being overwhelmed by too many ideas, valuing optimization, releasing from certain kinds of thinking in relation to fears, doubts, and indecision and insecurities, to maintain a flow-based state of mind which will allow us to, and thus from the true identity, identify with the accurate opinions in relation to our vision. That way we maintain a harmony between the divergent thinking and the convergent thinking, as we talked about in the last video. Harmony within is expressed as harmony without. We always want to remember that we have to start with ourselves. So if Emmett Fox suggested that negative thoughts may show up for whatever the reason may be during the day, it's important to tie into what we said in the last video and not shame ourselves in regards to these thoughts, but rather allow them to pass as we maintain a degree of presence. So first start with self. He says, you must be quite clear that what this calls for is that you shall not entertain or dwell upon negative thoughts. Note this carefully. It is not the thoughts that come to you that matter, but only such of them as you choose to entertain and dwell upon. So maybe in certain stages of our journey, we might feel that we are at the whim of certain kinds of thinking, when in actuality, we're given the 2 gifts of speech and mind. So with the conscious use of the 2 gifts of speech and mind, we can identify with the accurate thinking. So here are 4 things that a person can do to increase awareness, which allows a person to find nuanced distinction. And thus, as a result of the nuanced distinction, identify with the true nuanced distinction, which will allow them to produce success. For example, I've seen this on the entrepreneurial journey. A person starts a business and they put together a list of prospects that they reach out to. They start the journey of contacting the prospects. And because they get 2 or 3 rejections, they believe that entire list of prospects are not interested in their product or service. Upon deeper reflection, we realize that that wasn't enough sample to really come to that conclusion. They may have biased over to that conclusion because they felt overwhelmed, because they identified with thoughts that suggested fear. As a result, they found themselves procrastinating or doing busy work rather than effective work. And while they distracted themselves doing those things, they were missing out on the opportunity for innovation of their selling and marketing, which could have been found by committing to having those conversations with the prospects. Because through the conversations, you find better ways of marketing, better ways of selling, better ways of innovating your product or service, or innovating your marketing so you can sell your product or service, or innovating your communication so that you can sell your product or service, or innovate the product or service in a way that actually translates into sales, thus serving the market, offering the benefits, and receiving the compensation fairly so as a result of it. Here are some things that a person wants to identify with more so in order to be able to see those nuanced distinctions, such as what I mentioned, and then go down the process of calling up those other individuals, provided that they know that's the thing they have to do. And then also in the process of those conversations, reflect very deeply on the different elements in the conversation so that they can then value optimization even more. And through the nuanced distinctions that they get through the conversations, as mentioned, they can optimize their selling and their marketing. Here are some ideas which we're going to, at the end of the video, weave them into an affirmation to further encourage certain thinking patterns that will allow us to release from drifting and maintain a more lighthearted conviction or flow on the journey to realizing our vision. Number one is recognize the dominant thoughts that you polarize to. So real time in the moment, a person can notice if they enter into dwelling into thoughts that are not in harmony with the vision, fears, doubts, indecision-based thoughts. By recognizing that they're transcendent to the mind, they release from the thinking and then find the accurate thinking in relation to the vision. This accurate thinking is found within, or they can also stimulate the accurate thinking, get even more perspectives, by just allowing themselves to be open to different ways of looking at things. Also, releasing from rigidity of mind, relaxing the rigidity of mind, and aligning more with fluidity of mind, which is essentially embracing polarity, which is what we discuss in the Kabbalion. Recognizing that there are many degrees and many nuanced degrees between two sides. For example, a person asked me the other day, what's better, in your opinion, book smarts or street smarts? And I said, there was a time in my life in the earlier stages where I said that street smarts were a lot more effective in the entrepreneurial world. Then in the later stage of the journey, I started to identify more with book smarts because I recognized that in some of the areas, I was spinning my wheels and I was doing the same thing over and over again. And I needed to get some different perspectives on how to optimize. I then brought myself to a nice harmony that says, I value both. I value the street smarts, how to think, and I value the book smarts, some suggestions as to what to think. And that's the key word, suggestion. You don't have to think exactly how it is being suggested to you. You can observe and reflect back on your experiences and in relation to your vision, the different attributes, and think accordingly. This brings us more into a fluidity of mind. We're not saying one is better than the other, but seeing them both as one, and depending on, we work with one or the other. Which also brings me to point number 4, encouraging other ideas, thinking and doing things differently, recognizing that there are many different ways to produce success, to bring forth the result, to market a business, to sell. And while there are some best practice ways that have been identified based on certain principles, as you go down the journey, you realize these principles, and then you improvise and customize and find your own way, which generally tends to be built on the sound principles. And this is found by just encouraging these 4 things. Number 1, recognizing that perhaps we're polarizing to some aspect on the scale of 2 opinions. Number 2, that there are many different ways and nuanced ways of looking at what we are experiencing. Number 3, encouraging more of a fluidity of mind. Understanding that sometimes it's better to do it one way, and sometimes it's better to do it the other way, and sometimes it's better to do it in a nuanced way in relation to one way or another. As we start to identify with this kind of thinking, what we find is it's easier to release from certain kinds of negative thinking. B, we find ourselves a lot more stimulated, thus less likely to drift. And C, we automatically find ourselves from within receiving the accurate thinking in relation to what we're experiencing. The key to this is first start with self. We first accept ourselves and say we are transcendent to the thinking, and thus we have the two gifts of speech and mind that can be used consciously. And the accurate speech is really going to be in relation to the vision. For example, a person might get rejected in selling, and they might start to feel shameful towards themselves in regards to the rejection. They might feel that they're not good enough or something like that. They recognize that they're polarizing to a certain thought, and they ask themselves, what's a different way of looking at it? Knowing that one of the goals is to maintain and to further cultivate a higher degree of fluidity of mind, so they would have more of a flow-based conversation in sales. You'll notice this as you continue, if you're in sales, get better at the selling process. It will be a lot more of a dynamic, free-flowing conversation, still leading to the end, but a lot more free-flowing because you are a lot more fluid in your mind, in your thinking. You also recognize that there are many different ways of doing things, and you encourage it and actually experience it. One of the things that I always suggest is to add more variety in your life by trying different things, exploring different opinions, having conversations with people who don't necessarily see things the way you do. See if you can learn maybe a handful of things for them that you can integrate. By allowing yourselves to have this kind of flexibility in your thinking, it's going to be very helpful in the moment if we find ourselves identifying with negative thinking. So the key of what he suggests is it's not the negative thinking that causes us to drift. The thoughts may drift into our mind and we identify with it, and then we go into drifting states of mind. And we can also practice the conscious use of the two gifts of speech and mind and allow ourselves to tap into this intelligence and ideas that are already within us as a result of encouraging them and allow them to express as the ideas to identify with, to bring forth a flow-based journey to the vision. Now, acceptance is very important because, as mentioned earlier and brought up in our Sunday's video, if a person has a lot of shame within themselves, they might not accept themselves. This might express as shaming others, shaming themselves, rather than accepting themselves and accepting others. And this creates unnecessary convolution in thinking and thus convolution in behaviors on the journey. So we want to practice a higher degree of acceptance, and we first start with accepting self. Accept ourselves the way we are and recognize that we have the ability to draw from within the ideal perspective and identify with it on the journey to realizing the vision. Now, if you do discover that the flow breaker or whatever it is needs to be changed, in the entrepreneurial journey, I suggest the following framework, and there are many ways we can work with it, but this is a high level. You could do it differently. You can optimize whatever it is you're doing. You could delegate it. You could automate it or eliminate it in part or in whole or in combination, depending on what it is. By having these simple filters with us throughout the day, it allows us to practice the conscious use of the two gifts, speech and mind. It also prevents drifting or reduces the drifting. And it also contributes to a higher degree of consistency because a lot of times a person can feel discouraged if they go into different states of mind and they don't know how they got into those different states of mind, but they seem to be going into different states of mind that are not in harmony with the vision. And by recognizing that they are the ones allowing themselves to go into these different states of mind, and they can change their thinking in relation to the different aspects of the journey, they can then consciously choose the accurate state of mind that's one with the vision. The first-class concept of self-based way of living from the vision. So let's tie this all together. A person picks a task or a project. For some reason, they recognize a lack of consistency or overwhelmed with ideas or not valuing optimizing their process and ideas, seeing them all the way to completion. having difficulty transcending to fears, doubts, and indecision or insecurity-based thinking, identifying too much of the opinions of others rather than checking in within themselves and identifying the true opinion that's going to be in harmony with the vision. They can then integrate the 7-day mental diet process by recognizing that they're not their thoughts, they're transcendent to their thoughts. So a few ways of working with this information. We could do this real time, in the moment, where they recognize that they're not their thoughts. They can release from the identification from the thoughts. And we first start with self and accepting ourselves the way we are. And then from there, selecting the accurate perspective, changing how we relate to it, accepting it the way it is, or changing it in some shape or form. Another way we can work with this is to note these areas, and then perhaps at the end of the day, or at a certain point in the day, recognize that in certain experiences that we're having certain thought processes in which we think a certain way, which is bringing us into different states of mind, which break our flow. And then ask ourselves, what's a better way of looking at it? And thus then create the audio affirmations, the self-talk, the revision, or environmental changes that will further encourage the ideal way of thinking. And to encourage this more often so that you can cycle through the different perspectives that are available within, as well as inspired by others, I recommend these 4 aspects here. Number 1, recognize the dominant thoughts that you polarize to. For example, do certain conversations or certain information cause you to feel shame within yourself? That's the source of the interpretation, the shame within, and then release from the shame using the subconscious mind work. Number 2, be open to the different ways of looking at things. Realize that the beautiful thing about this world we live in is we have many different perspectives, many different ways of looking at things, and we can learn from everybody. Number 3, we can practice a higher degree of fluidity of mind, releasing from the rigidity of mind, because when you have the fluidity of mind, as a result of integrating what's being discussed here, as well as last Thursday's video, you experience a lot more lightheartedness, flow in your day-to-day journey, and you are able to maintain your focus and your attention, the richness of your imagination, and the strength of your attention on what you're working on what it is that you're doing. And you're also within yourself encouraging to look at the ideas so you can learn different things and integrate the different things into what you're doing. Thus, as a result of it, you'll find yourself being more consistent. You'll find yourself automatically picking the true ideas that are in harmony with the vision. You'll value the optimization because you recognize that if failure shows up or things didn't work out in the way that you planned, there are ways of optimizing it so you could turn it back into your favor, because as he stated, a drifter is one who permits himself to be influenced and controlled by circumstances outside of his own mind. This is all happening within our mind. And how we behave and how we express is spawned from the 2 gifts of speech and mind, and what we identify with in our states of mind and our thinking, our belief system. As a result, we're able to rapidly transcend and get better at it more so every day through the conscious practice of this. Certain meaning in regards to fears, doubts, indecision, and insecurities. So the fears, doubts, indecision, and insecurities, whatever the thinking may be, doesn't have to hold us back. We don't have to identify with that thinking. As we don't identify with that thinking and we align with the true thinking, that becomes the first-class concept of self. Also, in relation to number 5, we go within and evaluate the information. Whatever information, opinions are suggested to you, you check in within yourself and you say, is it true for me? And is it true for my distinct experiences? And is it true for my distinct vision, what I desire to see brought forth? So I trust you found this video to be helpful. We got into even more distinction in regards to what we've been discussing from our last Thursday's video. I recommend actually watching all those flow videos. I trust they'll all be helpful. So then let's conclude this with an affirmation so we can integrate all these elements. You can say, I realize that I have a higher degree of consistency because I'm able to identify what I polarize to, change the meaning within, or release from that thinking, find the accurate meaning within, and as a result, optimize what I'm doing from the perspective of love, flow, and harmony with my vision. I'm able to embrace complexity and find the simplicity and thus value the journey. I realize I'm transcendent to the gifts of speech and mind. Thus, I have the ability to reinterpret what I polarize to in regards to fears, doubts, indecision, insecurities. As a result, I listen to myself and trust myself, which brings me into a higher degree of fluidity of mind. This opens up the door of possibilities of different ways of thinking and looking at things and different ways of doing things, which I'm able to integrate into my optimization and see my opportunities and ideas all the way to completion. As a result, I recognize the importance of maintaining the divine center within myself and live in and from that. Through the process, I'm able to influence myself and consciously use my two gifts of speech and mind to bring forth my vision from a place of peace, love, and harmony. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.